Look at that smudge. Look at those germs she leaves on the doorknob. And here's Bob's hand picking them up. Bob, his hand now covered with germs picked up from that doorknob, transfers them to a book. Sue, having the bad habit of wetting her finger to turn pages, carries the germs from the book to her mouth, and then passes them along with a pencil to Anne. Anne carries them home and leaves them on the family's dinner table. Yes, even during an ordinary conversation, saliva and mucus particles escape our mouth and easily reach others who inhale them as they breathe.
Hi YouTube. In this video I aim to highlight the ease with which flat earth disinformation is spread. The strength of the flat earth confirmation bias, the lack of even the most basic research, and the total absence of any critical thinking provide the perfect breeding ground for new nonsense to evolve, mutate, and infect the willingly unvaccinated flat earth population. We will start the story at the end with this guy, M. Benz. In his recent upload, Modern Flat Earth Societies, he excitedly tells his audience about a video he's seen made by this guy, D-Marble. Yep, you know him, he's the spirit level on a plane guy. Let's hear what he has to say. This is going to take a few minutes, I'm afraid.
There was an article that was published in April 1900. All right, let's go ahead and get into this one. Let me see. This is from a newspaper in Minnesota. Says Earth is round and he may be thrown in prison. Sad condition of affairs in England. Sir John Gorst accused of intention to teach false precepts. City of Portsmouth excited. It is painful to read that Sir John Gorst, the head of the British Educational Department, is in serious trouble and has been threatened by Mr. Ebenezer Breech and other taxpayers of the City of Portsmouth in the Kingdom of England with prosecution under the Impostor Act. It seems that the schools of Portsmouth have been teaching the damnable and heretical doctrine that the earth is a sphere. So look, the idea that they were teaching that the earth is a sphere was called damnable and heretical in those times. Just so we're on the same page. Okay, let's get back to this thing. Sir John's attention has been called to this dissemination of seditious and treasonable doctrine, but he has refused to correct the abuse. Again, with the names here. Seditious and treasonable doctrine. And yet he refuses to correct his abuse. Abuse is what they call it, him teaching this. Isn't that something? Ebenezer and his friends know, of course, that the earth is as flat as a pancake. They have been patient with Sir John, and day after day have allowed the false teaching regarding the shape of the earth to go on, but can stand it no longer, they say, to see the children corrupted with this most heretical doctrine, as the complainants call it in their protest. They call this is from the 1900s. This is from the year 1900, and in that day, teaching of the globe earth model was called heretical, treasonable. They said that they were corrupting the children by teaching this. Okay, let's continue on. Sir John Gorst has many political enemies, and even his political friends do not always agree with him, but the depth of his depravity was not known until he was unmasked by Mr. Ebenezer Breech and his friends. Depraved. They called him depraved for teaching the globe model. Sir John may cavort about Parliament and deceive some people, but when it comes against a body of respectable British taxpayers and bulwarks of the throne and the guardians of the Constitution, it is another matter. Such newfangled ideas as that of the earth being a sphere he may impose upon the frivolous persons who riot in the ungodly city of London, but not upon the taxpayers of Southampton. Ebenezer and his friends mean business and have served formal notice upon the Portsmouth School Board that the teaching that the earth is a sphere, quote, cannot be allowed to continue under any circumstances, plea, or explanation whatever, end quote, and that it must be abandoned under pain of the punishment for schism by the law provided. After having stamped out the dastardly doctrine in the schools of Southampton, the committee announced that they will go up to London and bring the London School Board before the courts, being well advised and informed that the same doctrine regarding the shape of the earth is also taught in the London schools. So not only are they upset about what's going on in Southampton, they were going to London. Okay, because the same globe earth cosmology was being taught in those schools, and since it was so heretical, since it was so seditious and treasonable, they decided that they were going to have to go to London also and go ahead and try to correct the situation there. So they were on a rampage to fix this whole thing, which makes sense. Sir John, meantime, is to be brought to court and prosecuted under the Impostors Act, aforesaid. Now, the Impostors Act is a part of the British Constitution. Probably no one knows what is and what is not a part of that nebulous thing, and provides certain pains and penalties, such as forfeiture of estate, meaning he could lose his home for teaching the globe model, and burning at the stake if recalcitrant, meaning if he's not cooperative with authorities. He can lose his home or be burned at the stake. Yeah, it was that serious back then. Ebenezer and his friends are worthy and reputable citizens and mean business. If necessary, they will light the fires of Smithfield again for the wicked Sir John. At last account, Sir John was still at large, and so was Ebenezer. Okay, so back in the 1900s, basically what this is saying is, this guy, Sir John, was out here teaching the globe model, and the taxpayers of this city were so upset about it that they brought him up on charges. If found guilty of these charges, he could lose his home and or be burned at the stake. At the end, it said he was still at large. So he was on the run from the law because he was being charged with teaching the heliocentric model. This is 118 years ago. This guy could have lost his home and been burned at the stake. It was called seditious. It was called treasonable. It was called heretical. They stated that children were being corrupted by learning this globe model. And that's exactly what's being done to our children right now. And that's why it's so important that we go ahead and get this information out here. Because even back then, they knew that the earth was flat and stationary, and that this whole globe model, it was ridiculous. It was nonsense. Went completely against what we experience in everyday life. Okay? And the idea that they were teaching children that was punishable by death, basically. So that's exactly what was going on. That's why it's important to spread this thing out, because our kids are being taught this nonsense. So when people come to you saying something along the lines of, oh, you believe that the earth is flat, you're trying to take us back to the Stone Age or the Dark Ages, or they say some stuff like, no, people have always known that the earth was a globe, that we've always been living on a spinning ball. No, fact of the matter is, most of the ancient civilizations already knew that the earth was flat, covered with a dome, and stationary, that we were not on a spinning ball flying through space. So when people come at you with this stuff saying that flat earth is the new idea, fact of the matter is, this is just 118 years ago. This guy could have been burned at the stake for spreading this heliocentric nonsense. So go ahead and hit them with this one when they come at you with that stuff, because we don't have to deal with that. This globe model, this heliocentric nonsense, that's the new kid on the block. The earth always has been, always will be flat and stationary, period.
An interesting story indeed. If you were to believe his arrogant comments, you would think D. Marble arrived at this story through his own research. But D. Marble got it from this guy, Mr. Thrive and Survive, who read it out at the Flat Earth Conference. And Mr. Thrive and Survive heard it here in the Sun and Moon group from this guy, 5 Arts Liberalis. And 5 Arts got it from, who knows, maybe this guy, Zup Zuke, who says he got it from this guy, or actually girl, Nicole Cote.
Hi, stop it, you. Stop it, stop it. Come here, what do you think you're up to? You've probably infected thousands of people already.
Okay, let's get back to the article. Believe it or not, this article is reporting on real events, but in a satirical and extremely ironic style that was common in Victorian newspaper reporting. Ebenezer Breech was a popular eccentric poet and ardent flat earth proponent who took Portsmouth by storm in the 1890s. Here is a report on one of his flat earth lectures from the Hampshire Telegraph, Saturday the 23rd of December 1893. Flat Earth Lecture, Riotous Scene at Landport. Mr. Ebenezer Breech reached the summit of his fame at the Lower Albert Hall, Southsea on Monday night, when he lectured on The Flowers of Astronomy and Their Lessons. The hall was crowded, and from the first the entertainment was of the noisiest. Several members of the town council were present. Mr. Breech gave a lecture of the description with which he has made his fellow townsmen familiar. It is illustrated with a model of the flat earth and travelling sun. At the conclusion there was a perfect riot. Most of the audience surged round the platform and the model. The chairs were overturned and piled in the centre of the room in a heap. Someone wrenched the North Pole from the centre of the model. Then the precious model itself was thrown about the hall, once striking a lady on the head. It was kicked and beaten to pieces with sticks. The soda, which represented Antarctic ice, was thrown at Mr. Breech. The table on which the model stood was overturned and hauled round. The sun and other apparatus were trodden underfoot by the mob. The lecturer's table was upset. Manuscripts, books, pamphlets and programmes were scattered all over the floor. The noise was indescribable. Everyone hooted and yelled and groaned and whistled. Some sang "For he's a jolly good fellow," while smashing the model, and others chanted "We won't go home till the morning." A wooden-legged auditor had to be carried out of the mob leg in hand. Sticks were whirled about, and the crowd surged to and fro till Mr. Breech took the North Pole under his arm and made his escape by a back way. Then the rioters gave a final cheer and hustled out just as the lights went out and darkness closed in on the scene of the melee. Another lecture report from the Hampshire Evening Telegraph, Saturday 29th of August 1896, describes Ebenezer's appearance. When Mr. Breech appeared, resplendent in a dress coat with trousers to match and a figured waistcoat, to say nothing of the great yellow flower in his buttonhole, he met with the most enthusiastic reception. We can see from this that the flat earth idea was occasionally the subject of lectures in the late 19th century, and that most people did not take it or Ebenezer seriously. Breech was regarded as a harmless and colourful eccentric, and people would clearly humour him for their own entertainment. He makes the newspapers many times. Here is another example. Portsmouth Evening News, Wednesday 4th of October 1899. Mr. Ebenezer Breech before the magistrates. An extraordinary application. Mr. Ebenezer Breech is carrying on the flat earth agitation with the undaunted ardour which is peculiar to him, and at every opportunity flaunts before the eyes of his opponents the more or less convincing arguments advanced by him to the effect that the earth is flat. But sometimes Mr. Breech appears in a new role, and whatever it happens to be, it is certain that he succeeds in distinguishing himself in no small degree. This morning Mr. Breech appeared in the original character of Honorary Grand Master of the Lodge, though of what lodge Mr. Breech appeared to be as much in the dark as anybody else. He was positive, however, that he was to be Honorary Grand Master of some lodge, and he went to the Portsmouth Police Court buoyed up by confidences in his infallible theories, to request the presiding magistrates, Messrs. A. White and J. Geeve, sign a somewhat ambiguous document which ran as follows. This is to certify that we have intervened and declare that this is Professor Breech, resident and burgess of the town of Portsmouth, England. Witness our signatures as two magistrates of this borough, this 4th of October 1899. This document was handed to the magisterial bench for inspection, and after reading it through, Mr. White drew Mr. Breech's attention to a glaring mistake. "We can't sign this document in its present form," said Mr. White. "You state here that this, the paper, is Professor Ebenezer Breech. That, of course, is palpably wrong. You should have placed your photograph on the certificate, and possibly we might have signed it." Mr. Breech protested that it was not usual to have photographs on certificates. The magistrates, however, were immovable, and Mr. Breech finally expressed himself as willing to fall in with their views. When should he come, he inquired. "Tomorrow morning. Any time," said Mr. White. and Mr. Breech then took his departure, doubtless exulting in the fact that though his application was refused, the refusal was qualified. We understand that the lodge of which Mr. Breech is to become Honorary Grand Master belongs to the Ancient Order of Unshaven Boars. Recently Mr. Breech received a document purporting to come from Johannesburg, and to the effect that he was made Grand Master of the Order on condition that he applied to magistrates in yellow breeches and red embroidery, the regalia of the Order, and obtained a certificate of identification. Mr. Breech seems to have acted on this command, though omitted the regalia. So what of Ebenezer's attempted legal action against Sir John Gorst mentioned in the original article? Here is a report from the Portsmouth Evening News, Tuesday, September the 12th, 1899. Mr. Breech in London, a very busy time. Mr. Breech of Portsmouth, poet, author and flat earth philosopher of the world, was in London on Monday and had a very busy time. The object of his visit was to serve Sir John Gorst with a notice to at once stop the indictable practice of the educational department throughout the country in allowing the spherical theory of the earth to be taught in their schools. But besides this, Mr. Breech, who returned to Portsmouth last night, did a round of many of the newspaper offices, the Wesleyan Methodists, the Freethinkers, Phillips of Fleet Street, the well-known Globe and Mapmaker, and other places. A representative of the Morning Herald was fortunately able to have a chat with Mr. Breech in the evening, just outside the British Museum reading room, where he had been to once more ferret out the misdeeds of Copernicus. At the Education Office, Mr. Breech said he saw a gent who had a very open mind. He was not in the least prejudiced, and it was a pleasure to talk to him. He listened to Mr. Breech for quite half an hour and interposed no objections. In fact, he seemed quite struck by his arguments, and he promised to lay the matter strongly before Sir John. And what do you intend doing, Mr. Breech, if Sir John does not take your warning and prohibit the teaching of the round earth? Ah, he will do what we wish him to do. There is no logical escape. And if he does not, well, we shall simply make protest the concrete and seize upon all globes one by one and destroy them. But, continued Mr. Breech, Sir John is too wise a man not to see the logic in our argument, far too expedient a man to drive flat philosophers to extremes. Matters will not wait a crisis. Mr. Breech accepted the Herald representative's congratulations on the success of his day's visit to the town with a self-satisfied smile which spoke volumes. Sir John Eldon Gorst was a Tory Member of Parliament who became Vice President of the Committee on Education in 1895. His political career continued until 1906 and he died in 1916. He was never charged with any crimes or ever on the run from the police. Nor was he ever in danger of being burned at the stake, which was abolished as a form of execution in England in 1790, well over a century before the original article was written. I said at the start we would start our story at the end, with this guy, but of course he is not the end of this sorry tale. D. Marble also infected all these people, including this guy who is now trying to infect 220 million Portuguese-speaking people of the world. Of course, I commented on D. Marble's video, pointing out the things he can easily check to validate the true meaning of this article, and our valiant truth seeker simply deleted my comment 3 times because I reposted from another 2 accounts, and those comments were also removed.
Bactine doesn't sting like old-fashioned antiseptic. There's the Bactine! There's the Bactine!
Down go the mean old germs.
Flat Earth is full of intellectual dishonesty and lies, but perhaps the biggest lie is the one that Flat Earthers tell about themselves. They claim to be critical thinkers, savvy to the methods of the media, questioning everything, and only prepared to believe things which they can personally confirm. As we have seen, in actual fact they believe anything which appears to confirm their bias without question. They don't even bother to do the easy bits of research like I did here, and in this case we also see how so many struggle to derive accurate meaning and understanding from their own native written language. When a flat earther like D. Marble has the facts delivered to him on a plate, he discards and ignores them in favour of indulging his ego and his fantasy. Thanks for watching. Please rate, comment and subscribe.